John. That first tune we just played is one that I wrote a few years ago for those twins that he talked about, Jamie and Julie, who are now 22, graduating from college next month, and they grew up way too fast, so I wrote a tune called Lingering Childhood, and we wanted to start with that. I am delighted and honored to be here talking to this prestigious group about two of my favorite subjects, and two of my passions, actually, jazz and leadership. I have spent a lot of time in the last few years teaching leadership, actually, at Disney for our executives in theme parks and resorts at the Disney Institute. And I've discovered over the years that this passion of mine of jazz happens to be a very good metaphor to use for understanding the principles that are required if you want to run an organization effectively, especially if you want to run one that is going to be creative and innovative. And I like to talk, or I like to call this performance that we're going to be sharing with you this afternoon, Giant Steps, Stimulating Leadership Excellence in an Organization. And the reason that I call it Giant Steps will become apparent to you in just a few minutes. Before we do that, as John Hale mentioned, I would love to introduce the musicians, my friends, who are joining me this afternoon. I learned very early on that in jazz, when I was taking lessons and trying to become a better player, my teachers shared with me that the best thing you can do is get on a bandstand where everybody else in the bandstand is more talented than you are, more talented, more creative. Because if that's the case, then they are going to pull up your performance level. Well, that's what I've attempted to do this afternoon by inviting some incredibly talented musicians that hopefully will make me look good and pull up my performance level. They're from a lot of different places, but the one thing they have in common is a link to Disney in one way or the other, either now or in the past or in the future, because of their performance ability. They've played in clubs all over the country and bands all over the country, and I just have a great time with them. So please give a welcome to Danny Jordan on the saxophones. We have Charlie Silva on bass. Barry Smith on drums. And Orlando Sanchez is playing a whole lot of instruments back there. I don't know what they're all called, but he's on percussion. For us at Disney, leadership excellence is all about stimulating excellence not just in yourself and in your own performance, but being able to stimulate leadership excellence in everyone around you. And what I mean by that is stimulating excellence in your colleagues, in your subordinates, even your bosses. That's what leadership excellence is for us. It is not about supervising a whole lot of other people. That's not what leadership is about. In fact, we go out of our way at Disney to characterize some of our leaders who may not have anybody directly that they are supervising as individual contributors. And in fact, some of our individual contributors are our very best leaders in terms of modeling the right values and behaviors. For the last several years, we have actually not just focused on leadership excellence, but have invested in training. And we have seen the results. We've seen the results not just measured in financial results and operational results and higher levels of guest satisfaction. We've also gone to the trouble of actually measuring for leadership in our organization. And very few companies do that, or very few organizations. We actually take surveys every year throughout the entire organization at Walt Disney World, for example, every single cast member. And we measure such things as leadership and our processes and our culture. And we do it not just for the company as a whole, but we break it down to individual locations. So we know who is effective as a leader, who is performing, and who is not. And we have seen it transform our company dramatically. Why did we go down this path? Well, we, as John alluded to, face a lot of the same problems that you do. And in fact, in the early 90s, we were very concerned about our business. We had some tough times there with a Gulf War and international recessions and earthquakes in California and all kinds of threats to our business. And we looked around and we realized that we had a lot of internal problems. And I'm talking about bureaucracy. I'm talking about silos. We were not communicating well with each other. We were fighting internally most of the time. And it was very demotivating. I also saw that when I examined the styles of a lot of our leaders or managers, at the time I would probably describe them, I found they were very conflicting. And they created a lot of tension in the organization. In some cases, it was even destructive, what some of the management styles and leadership styles were like. And so we focused on leadership excellence, and I am very happy to say that the last several years we have continued to see progress measured not just in those easily measurable results, but we now can benchmark ourselves against the few Fortune 1000 companies that actually invest and measure leadership, and we see our scores in the upper percentiles. I will tell you that for our very successful run in the 90s, and we continue to be very successful today in the theme park and resort segment, I attribute, although there's a lot of reasons why we're successful, I attribute the number one reason to our emphasis on leadership and sticking with it and investing in it. And in fact, I consider it our competitive advantage, if you will, as we look out to the new millennium. And in spite of all the challenges that we're facing that are similar to yours, new technology being thrown at us, a very fast-moving environment, an enormous amount of competition, I still think our focus on leadership excellence is our biggest competitive advantage. Now, I want to get into the jazz portion, and I think one thing I'd like to do, if I may, I don't know if it's easy to turn the lights up or not. If you can, I'd like to take a quick survey of the audience. And I'd like to know how many of you in the audience have ever taken a music lesson? That's very good. How many of you took music lessons for more than 3 years? Okay. How many of you like jazz? How many of you hate jazz? This is going to be a very long hour for you, and I'm very sorry about that. The best thing I can say is there's a cocktail waiting on the other end of this session. Well, my love of jazz began, I think, when I was in school. I started classical piano when I was 3.5, but I was attracted to jazz, I think, because it looked like it was so much fun. And I loved the bit about jazz where you could improvise and you could express yourself. Some today say that jazz is probably the only true American art form, at least in music, that we have given the world. It has evolved in the United States all within the last 100 years. And it only could have been born here because of the convergence of so many factors and because of the diversity of this country. It is, in fact, a combination of African melodies and rhythms clashing with European harmonies and instruments. And the result is a unique and differentiated art form that is probably best known because of that improvisation, where the players improvise or kind of go crazy with their own thoughts and feelings in the middle of a tune. Jazz improvisation is, in essence, spontaneous creativity and innovation. And I must say, trying to listen to it and understand it, let alone play it, can sometimes seem overwhelming and very complex. But what I want to do today is break down the complexity of that, and in the process, hopefully extract some principles that I think are incredibly relevant to all of our organizations. To do that, I have to start somewhere, and I think I'd like to start with the blues. The blues is, let's call it, a subset of all the jazz forms. And there's something very interesting about the blues for all the music majors out there. The blues are always the same. The blues are always 12 bars long. Doesn't matter whether a jazz band is playing, or a blues band, or a country western band, they're always 12 bars. And more importantly, the structure of those 12 bars is always the same. The blues happens to be, and I'm using Roman numerals here, but the Roman numerals relate to a note on the piano. So for example, a C scale, this is 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the blues are always 4 bars of the 1 chord, 2 bars of the 4 chord, 2 bars of the 1 chord, 1 bar of the 5 chord, 1 bar of the 4 chord, and 2 bars of the 1 chord. Now, if we happen to pick a key to play the blues in, like F, the actual chords would be as follows. 4 bars of F, 2 bars of B flat, 2 bars of F, 1 bar of C, 1 bar of B flat, and 2 bars of F. And it doesn't matter, as I say, what the tune is or what the style is, the blues are always the same, 12 bars. Right now, we want to play 12 bars of a very well-known blues tune composed by Sonny Rollins. It's called Sunny Moon for Two. And we're going to play it very simply, Danny and I am going to play those chords just as you see them. But this time, we're going to stretch out, as we say in jazz. There is a convention in jazz that you often play the melody, and then you take turns creating or improvising, and then you usually come back and play the melody again. We call the melody the head. So Danny and I are going to play the head, we're going to solo a little bit, we're going to come back and finish with the head. We are going to stick with this 12-bar structure, and although you may hear all of us stretch out, and I'm going to play a whole lot of other chords, the fact of the matter is they're all rooted in those 12 chords. Now, I know you're all saying to yourselves, what has that got to do with leadership? The interesting thing is that has a lot to do with leadership. You may not have realized it, but when we began playing that tune, we had a framework that we were working with. We had a series of agreements among the musicians. And without that foundation, without that framework, without those agreements, we would not have been successful in being creative and innovative in our improvisation. In fact, the agreements include the fact that we were going to play the blues with that structure, and we stuck to that structure. I know we kind of stretched out, but it was those 12 chords. We picked a key. We agreed on F. We picked a time signature, 4 beats to the bar. We picked a tempo. Danny set it off. We never diverged from that tempo. We accepted a convention on how to play it in terms of starting with the head and sharing solos and ultimately coming back and playing the head. We even shared a vision implicitly among the musicians. And the vision was that if we are going to play together, we want to attain excellence. We know what jazz excellence sounds like. It's Miles Davis' recording of My Funny Valentine, or Duke Ellington's recording of Take the A Train, or John Coltrane's recording of Giant Steps. We know what jazz excellence feels like when we're in a groove and we are feeling and playing as if we were one. And we have an implicit goal every time that we get together that we're going to try our best to attain that jazz excellence. All of the framework and all agreements that I just talked about had to exist for us to have the fun and the opportunity to be creative and express our feelings in our improvisation. Ironically, the agreements in the framework didn't constrain the creativity, they actually enabled the creativity. Now, the parallels for that to an organization, I think, are quite significant. For an organization to be successful, they have to start with having a vision. I am not talking about a mission. A mission is what you do as an organization. A vision is what you aspire to become. A vision is aspirational. A vision for your organization is something that you may never quite attain, but it needs to be there because it is in fact, again, not just for the marketing people, it is in fact the thing that all of the employees in your organization can align around. And that's very true in our organization, that our tens of thousands of cast members believe in the vision that we have as an organization. An organization needs to be rooted in a set of values, values like honesty and openness and listening and diversity. The value of diversity is the value of accepting and valuing the differences among us. It needs to be a value in an effective organization, especially in today's world. The organization has to be rooted in a set of behaviors such as listening and coaching and partnering and embracing change and innovation. And in the end, the organization should be rooted in a goal. The goal can be as simple as wanting to excel at everything you do and to be the very best, but there needs to be a goal. In the end, if an organization has those agreements, that vision, those values, behaviors, and goals, it is the foundation that enables creativity, that enables improvisation, and ironically, it doesn't constrain it. Jazz has many styles, blues is one. But there's another style, didn't last very long. It came up, I think, in the mid-40s and probably was gone by the mid-50s. It was called bebop. And when my son was in high school playing sax, he was in the jazz band and he came home and said, "Dad, I've got this bebop tune. What is this stuff?" And I said, "Well, that was actually a very important part of jazz history. It's a very challenging form of jazz. It usually is very fast, lots of notes, lots of improvisation. You don't come away with a melody that you can hum. But if you really want to know the whole of jazz history, you need to be able to play bebop." And so I sat down and I wrote a tune that we'd like to perform for you now. And with a little Disney flair, I call it Bippity Boppity Bebop. Danny. That was really good. Once again, you may be asking, what does bebop have to do with running an organization? Well, as I've learned on the jazz stand, one of the things that you need to do is to be able to create an environment where risks can be taken and mistakes can be tolerated. I don't know why it is, but in jazz, that environment exists naturally. For you many music students out there, you may have noticed that I made a lot of mistakes in my solo, but the nature of the process is to try things, to come up with an idea, to try to express yourself, and some of those ideas don't work, and you make mistakes, as I made plenty. But it really doesn't matter because the environment in jazz is forgiving. Somehow, we have to make that happen in our organizations, where our employees are not threatened to come up with new ideas. They are not threatened to worry about making a mistake and wondering what the consequences are. It is absolutely essential, if we are going to deal with all the challenges we face in the future, that we create that environment. We had a very successful 25th anniversary at Walt Disney World. And one of the things that we did was to focus on our vision for that particular anniversary of trying to rekindle the memories that our guests have had with us over 25 years, coming back time and time again, to come back and relive some of those memories and to create some new ones. And of course, we had all kinds of plans and programs and processes. But one of the things that was really the most exciting and the most effective is when we turned to our employees, our cast members, and we said, we want each of you to take a responsibility for creating those memories for our guests. And so we created something called Magical Memories and Take Fives. Magical memories were moments every day in every location of the property where we go out of the way to do something to make it a very special visit. It could be a bowl of chicken soup to a guest who wasn't feeling well. It could be putting a little girl or a little boy at the front of the parade. It could be dealing with our horticulturists with a family and actually giving them some tips about gardening. Little simple things that made very special memories for our guests. And then we took it one step farther to say, besides the things that we planned, we want an environment where every one of our cast members could take 5 minutes, as many times as they'd like during the course of a day or a week, and go do something special for a guest. If it costs some money, that's fine. If it's out of the norm, that's fine. But take 5 and go do something special. We couldn't control all of that, so risks were taken and probably some mistakes were made. But it was empowering every individual in our organization to know that it was okay to go do this. And as a result, it made a huge difference in the level of guest satisfaction that we achieved during that anniversary. The second thing that I think is true in a bandstand and in an audience, but again, not enough in our organizations, is recognizing employee performance or cast performance. You clapped for Danny's solo. He deserved it. It was very, very good. Well, how simple and how effective is that? You're showing your appreciation for something that he has done, his thoughts, his creativity. That means the world to him because he becomes more enthusiastic. Why can't we do that more often in our organizations? Recognizing performance. It doesn't have to be necessarily with compensation. It can be a note, a smile, a pat on the back, something fun. But recognizing performance just stimulates our employees to do all the more. And we see it's infectious. And I don't understand why, although we do it on the jazz stand in a jazz concert, we don't do it enough in our organizations. The other interesting thing about performing as a jazz group is that we accept the concept of flexible roles and the whole power of teamwork. There isn't one leader on this stand. On that last tune, actually, Barry set the tempo, and he got us started. Danny did most of the soloing. Although you didn't realize it, we were probably counting on Charlie more than anybody else to continue driving the beat and get us successfully through the song. The point is this, that in a jazz group, it is very natural for us to take turns in other roles. It isn't always one person who has to be the same leader. And in fact, we found in our organization that one of the best things you can do to develop your employees is to find tasks, to find projects, to find initiatives where it is not simply this one person at the top of the hierarchy that is the leader, but you are giving people opportunity to be leaders for different tasks. And we do it in jazz, we need to do it more in our organizations. I must tell you that that has been very successful for us. We have learned with something called, we call action learning initiatives, where we take a lot of our management team, we go through a leadership training course, they pick up some very practical skills on how to be better leaders, And then we turn them loose on a set of problems that we have in the organization that we've never solved. And we get 12 of those people together, cross disciplines. There is no one boss. There is not a senior executive who's leading the team. And we turn those 12 individuals onto this problem, and time again, they come up with solutions that any one of us could never have done on our own. That's the power of flexible roles and the power of teamwork. I think another thing that is very apparent to us on the bandstand, it's not so apparent in our organizations, is a very simple concept of putting the right people in the right jobs. Now, I know that sounds simplistic to you, but it actually is incredibly important. If I had tried to pick up the saxophone, and if Danny had tried to play the piano, we would not have made it through that tune. Each of us has a job to do, and we have a particular set of skills and strengths and weaknesses for us to do that. Where we make a mistake in an organization is where we expect that everyone can do everything, and that's simply not the case. If you have the ability of, and it could be through a lot of very useful tools like profiling or structured interviews, of getting people in a job where they have an opportunity to succeed. It can still be a stretch, it can still be a challenge, but if you get the right people in the right jobs, the organization will have a better chance of success. Because if you get the wrong person in the job, not only is that one individual going to be frustrated, but he or she is going to frustrate everyone around him or her, and it becomes, unfortunately, a constraint on the organization's success. And another thing, and probably the final thing I'll point out on this tune, is the whole concept of communication, communicating continuously. Whether it was our smiles, our words, our sounds, we were communicating with each other. We were checking in with each other as we went through that tune. We actually were doing another form of communication. Toward the end, we were doing something we call trading fours, where actually 4 of us were actually taking turns playing solos and attempting to relate to each other. It happens naturally on a bandstand, but boy is it hard in an organization to communicate continuously, because each one of our employees wants to know that we're aligned around that vision. They want to know where we're going. They want to know answers to questions like, why are we doing that? And you simply cannot communicate enough. It's the only way a jazz band works. It is the best way for an organization to work. There is a very interesting quote that Walt Disney once gave when he was interviewed by a reporter very early on in the life of the Disney company. And this was 75 years ago. The company was just beginning to grow, and it was apparent that Walt Disney could no longer do the animation himself as he originally started out. And the reporter kind of said, well, how do you get it all done? I mean, you alone are responsible for the success. And he responded with a quote that's not often used in books or articles or speeches. He said, in response to this reporter, many hearts and minds and hands are usually there and behind one's notable achievements. We create the circumstances that either challenge us or allow us to achieve our dreams. And what he really was referring to is that we have the opportunity to create an environment that is conducive to us achieving our organization's goals. If we're not aware of that, if we're not aware of how to create that special environment, then we are going to be constrained and not be successful. This next song that I want to share with you came from listening. Listening is one of the most important behaviors that we have in our leadership training at Disney. This song came to me after listening to hundreds of piano players with the goal of trying to develop a style for myself that would be appropriate given my abilities. And I came across many piano players, but one in particular that I love, Bill Evans, who's no longer with us. He was a fabulous pianist because he created beautiful melodies, but he was an intellectual, and he did things on the piano that just amazed people. He also loved to do things that were dissonant or diverse. Oftentimes he'd be in 3/4 to the bar, 3 beats to the bar, but he'd play his right hand in 4/4, or he'd be playing in one key with his left hand and a different key with his right hand, which is very difficult. And I'm going to allude to that in a song that I wrote for him called Bill's Waltz. Well, as I reflect about Bill Evans and that style, it occurs to me that a very important part of leadership excellence is developing your own style, and I'm talking about every leader in the organization. A style that will be sensitive to each individual's strengths and weaknesses, and yet still be based on the core set of values and behaviors that are important. Nothing I've said about all these agreements that we need in an organization preclude the fact that there is plenty of room for uniqueness and originality in developing styles. As we focus on leadership excellence in all of our training, we realize that some of our leaders approach their job in many different ways. Some have a natural gift for humor, and they make the most of it. Others are incredibly serious but genuine, and they find a different style. What is critically important is that we realize that this is an opportunity for us to develop a unique style. No longer can we have the Perry White from the Daily Planet kind of autocratic leader as the model for leadership excellence in an organization. There is plenty, as we say, of room on our stage for great leaders and with a wide diversity of styles. I think in summing up the leadership excellence portion of this, and I want to then start talking about creativity very quickly, but I will tell you that we have focused on this leadership excellence. We have focused on creating this foundation and creating an environment. And if those things are present, then an organization is much better suited to become more creative and innovative. At the heart of jazz is the opportunity to be creative and innovative, and we call it improvisation. Trying to understand it sometimes can be very overwhelming. But I choose to believe that at the heart of anything complex is a simple idea. And what I want to do next is I want to tear apart some of the complexity of jazz improvisation and get to its core idea so that you see how, at the end of the day, how simple it actually is. To do that, I want to go back and do a quick demonstration of something that I learned when I was much younger, watching TV at the time, the Jack Paar Show. As many of you remember, long before Jay Leno and David Letterman, there was a Jack Paar Show. And what I loved about that show was the very few opening minutes. There was a musical conductor by the name of Jose Mendez, if any of you remember him. And he and Jack Paar would warm up the audience. And what would happen is Jack would go out there and he'd ask, actually I could use the lights up just a bit. He would ask the audience for their phone number and then see what he could do with it. So I would love it if somebody, if we could get the lights up just a bit, would volunteer their 7-digit phone number to me. Yes? 744-4396. And so if I go back and, again, put a number to each note on the scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 744-4396. 744, that's the challenge. 4396. Could we copyright your phone number? Actually, I think I can work with that. But I just kind of filed that away. I just thought that was kind of interesting that he would do that and in the process create something new. So I kind of filed that away in the back of my mind. And then I went to school and I wanted to really focus on jazz improvisation. And as it turns out, one of the best jazz teachers in the country was a gentleman by the name of David Baker, who is still teaching at Indiana University at Bloomington. And so I called up and I said, David, may I have a lesson with you? And he said, absolutely. And I went to him and I did my best job of playing something, I don't know, Pennies from Heaven or something to try to impress him. And he smiled and he said, okay, what would you like to accomplish? And I said, I want to become the best jazz improviser I can possibly be. And he said, okay, this is going to be easy. You only have to do one thing. I want you to learn a tune called Giant Steps. Giant Steps was recorded by the most famous tenor sax player of all time, John Coltrane. And he said, Judson, if you can learn Giant Steps, you can do anything, and nothing will get in your way. So I said, okay, this is a nice, neat package. I'm going to love this. So give me this tune. I want to go work on it. And he sent me home to learn Giant Steps. And I'm going to play the head for you now. In fact, I think we have it to put up on the screen. This is a very simple tune. It's actually only 16 bars long, and then it repeats. So it's 32 bars in total. And this is what it looks like. And this is what it sounds like. So I worked on that, and I went back a week later, and I said, okay, David, I now know giant steps. He said, well, great, you know the melody, but now what I want you to do is I want you to learn John Coltrane solo. Because if you can learn John Coltrane solo to this one tune, you can play anything, and I mean anything. Once again, I love the fact that he put it in such simple terms. This is all I have to accomplish. So I took this music, this is an actual transcription of John Coltrane solo, and I went home and I worked very hard on it. Now, I'm a little rusty at this, but fortunately I have Danny with me. So we'd like to play giant steps. We're going to play the head, then you can follow along. Danny's actually going to play the first two choruses of John Coltrane solo, and then we'll finish with the head. I didn't play it quite that well, but anyway, I went back to him, and I got myself through that the best I could. And then I kind of said, well, David, what is the point? And David then said, I want you to take out a pencil, and we're going to analyze this solo very quickly. What he wanted to show me was that at the end of the day, John Coltrane, in all of his brilliance, created this world-famous solo. There are few that are more famous than this particular solo, with a series of mathematical patterns. And so he said, Judson, I want you to look, and I want you to find every time in the solo when, just like Jose Mendez and Jack Parr were doing that game on the Jack Parr show, you can find a phone number or a mathematical pattern of 1, 2, 3, 5. And so I looked at it, and I realized, well, here's 1, 2, 3, 5. And I realized, here's 1, 2, 3, 5. Here's 1, 2, 3, 5. Here's 1, 2, 3, 5. Here's 1, 2, 3, 5, and it goes on. And then he said, now I want you to circle every time you just find the notes in a major chord, 1, 3, 5. And I find out they're here, they're here, they're here, they're here, they're here. And so you get the idea that by the time he finished analyzing the solo with me, I realized that it wasn't something that I needed to be intimidated by. I thought it was immensely complex. When we got done, I realized it was a very simple idea. It was a string of mathematical patterns that totally demystified the uniqueness of this solo. And that's what he was trying to teach me. I think the principle here is that in our organization, sometimes we become very overwhelmed with the complexity of the problems that we're dealing with, or the complexity of some new initiatives that we're trying. And the fact is, we shouldn't be. Creativity is not limited to one individual or one department in the organization. We have to empower every employee in the organization to have that spirit of wanting to break the complex down to the simple, to find the core ideas, and to not be intimidated by what otherwise seems very complex or overwhelming. As I think about what we've done recently at Disney, we were looking for growth, not quite sure what to do, didn't want to build another theme park right away, and we sat around a table and started thinking about cruising. And at first we were very intimidated because we did not have one person in our organization that came from the cruise industry. But the more we thought about it, the more we broke it apart, we realized that we had all of the core disciplines that we needed to be successful in cruising. We knew lodging, we knew restaurants, we knew live entertainment, we knew marketing, we knew all of those merchandise, we knew all of those core disciplines. Frankly, at the end of the day, we realized the only thing that we didn't know is how to drive the ship. And we figured that we could probably hire somebody to drive the ship, and we jumped into the cruising business. Again, I think the idea here is that we cannot let ourselves become overwhelmed or intimidated, or our employees. And in fact, we have to go to the core ideas and make them understandable. This next song demonstrates another principle that I think is very critical to stimulating creativity and innovation in an organization. And that is the whole subject of wanting to be different, of being divergent, of seeking diversity. I believe that diversity is the essence of creativity. Diversity in people, diversity in ideas, diversity is really the essence of creativity. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that that is one of our biggest sources within the bounds of our organization, if we can draw upon the diversity of our employees and the diversity of ideas. Sometimes when I sit down to compose, to inspire me or to get me going, I think of dissonance, I think of diversity, I think of something that's different, perhaps even uncomfortable. And I sat down one day and started playing with these two notes, G and a G sharp. They sound a little better when you separate them, but that's not a very pretty sound. And yet that dissonance and diversity kind of challenged me to find a way to resolve it. And so playing around, I took the dissonance and wrote a melody that I brought to the bandstand and sat down and thought it was going to be a slow tune. But again, seeking upon diversity, they thought, this sounds like a Latin tune. So let's play that. Let's get into this. And Orlando brought some complex rhythms into this that really surprised me. And then in the rehearsal, Danny said, well, wait a minute, I kind of think it's a swing tune. And so what we're going to do now is play this tune that I wrote called Tempestad. After we play the head, there's going to be 4 bars of silence. And when we come back, we're going to discard the Latin, and we're going to go into straight ahead swing, which is somewhat unconventional. I kind of liken that moment in the song to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, where Huck is getting away from the Widow Douglas and going out to experience in the world, and there is a feeling of complete freedom, and that's why we tried to create what we tried to create in this tune called Tempestad.